listening to the Top Music Guitar Podcast, the show for guitar teachers to learn about the craft of teaching great guitar lessons that students love. If you're looking to start or expand your studio and make guitar teaching your full-time dream job, you've come to the right place. Each week, you'll get to hear from some of the top guitar teachers from around the globe and get their best tips and experiences so you too can build your own dream studio. I'm your host, Michael, and I've founded one of the top guitar schools in Australia, written a best-selling curriculum, and I mentor guitar teachers. I'm excited to share my expertise with you and the wisdom of all the experts we interview. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Top Music Guitar Teaching Podcast. With me today, I've got a real treat for you guys. Someone originally from Philadelphia who now resides in Denver, Colorado. He's taught hundreds of guitar players all around America and has a step-by-step, fun, and very, very unique approach. And that is someone who has also transcended just merely teaching and gone into authoring books. He's got 3 titles on Amazon, which we're going to definitely talk about today. And that is Eric Stone. Eric, welcome to the Top Music Guitar Podcast.
Hey, Michael, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
It's great to have you. And I first saw your 10X guitar book because anything with a 10X logo in front of it gets me excited. And I definitely love all that kind of stuff. Are you a Grant Cardone fan by any chance?
I'm aware of him, and I have his 10X rule book, but I wouldn't call myself a fan other than just, it's a good book, but I am aware of him, but I wouldn't call myself a fan.
That was the first connection. I got, 10X guitar, damn, someone beat me to it. But, I've been watching from afar ever since, and some of the things you talk about, are really, really cool and really, really awesome. And hopefully we'll share some of the amazing things that you've learned from 20 years in the teaching business. It is 20 years as of this year, isn't it?
It is 20 years. I'd say about 12 years or so as my main time, full-time gig. 20 years ago is about when I started, though.
Fantastic. So we've got a 20-year wealth of knowledge, and I'm sure tons of guitar playing before that, making the step into teaching. But how about you give the listeners a brief overview of your story so far and how you've gone from just a guitar teacher in the local area to, moving to Hollywood and doing all that kind of rock star dream there before becoming an author?
Sure. Well, I started relatively late, I guess. I started when I was 17, which is not too late in the grand scheme of things, but compared to childhood virtuosos and a lot of people that end up doing this for a living, it's a little bit on the late side of things. And I had an awesome teacher my first year, and we'll talk more about kind of like the struggles I see with beginning guitar players, but I fortunately avoided them. And I went off to college next year, and that's when my struggles really started to begin, because it didn't take long for me to kind of hit the wall and not be a very good or even competent guitar player. And after college, I actually got a master's degree in education from University of Pennsylvania, and I was a former school teacher. And I understand that you're also almost a teacher. Is that right, Michael?
Almost a teacher. I pulled the pin a little bit before I got qualified, but yeah, it was almost going down that same path you went down.
So there's probably some interesting things that we could talk about with regards to that, and I'm sure I'll bring up a couple things today about it. But I was in those years, I started playing for Metallica and just Led Zeppelin, and a lot of like the typical bands people my age were into. And I think like the first year or so of playing, I discovered Dream Theater, discovered Steve Vai and the Shrapnel Records guys. And it quickly went from kind of this fun thing of playing guitar to kind of this, oh my God, how am I ever going to be as good as these guys? Just when I just heard their virtuosity. And after graduate school, after teaching, I continued to play, was kind of a middling guitar player at best. But I love music, I think I love the idea of playing more than I actually loved playing back then. And, also had in the back of my mind, it'd be a great idea to be a teacher as well, and kind of just combine both of my love for helping people, my love for music. And in my late 20s, I actually went back to school to the Los Angeles College of Music, Los Angeles Music Academy for a year plus. And it was awesome experience. It was, moving from Philly to LA. It was in a different world in a way, but it, just opened my eyes to so many things. And from a teaching perspective, the most important thing was that I learned kind of like a lot of counterintuitive things from different teachers and different clinicians that I saw out there. And it was the first time in the back of my mind where I thought, okay, there's like a little bit of a dichotomy between all the things that I was supposed to do to learn and all the things that I was supposed to do to learn how to become a good player. What everyone says is like the things that they did to become a good player. But then versus like the actual things that people did to become good players. And it was in the back of my mind, my time in LA. And it's something I really, when I moved to the Denver area a year or two after I finished out in LA, and it was something I really had a chance to explore in my studio. And we'll talk more about it today, where the academic stuff I was supposed to teach, it was just like people weren't into it. They weren't really doing well with it. They weren't able to play their songs. But the more that I brought in kind of just like the things that people mentioned as an aside, like, oh yeah, by the way, this is also cool. And then, did that for my students, did that for myself as a player. That's where things really took off. And that's where my books came from is a lot of that approach. So that's the long answer to your short question.
Awesome. It's really interesting you say that, because I'll use the analogy that there's obviously the academic book smart approach to learning, and then there's like the street smart approach to learning. And there's this whole academic side of guitar playing, which you've got to learn how to sight read, you've got to understand all this theory, you've got to do this, and that in this order. And then you've got a whole bunch of our favorite guitar players and rock stars and shredders who just did something completely different and became, the amazing guitar players that they are. And, it doesn't really matter genre specific, but for every academic guitar player we have, there's a whole bunch of, opposite examples and people who've done things differently and come out with the same, if not a better approach. So yeah, very interesting to hear you sort of, express it as the dichotomy of those opposing ideas.
It's not just in the rock world. It's I found that, and it's one of the things that as I was writing and researching 10x guitar that I wanted to really dig into was like, is this also in the jazz world? And it's absolutely also in the jazz world. And one of the teachers I studied with in LA is Tara Cacconi, who's used to be the head of the guitar department at the LA Music Academy / LA College of Music. And he's Christina Aguilera, Josh Groban's guitar player, and just had all these really, really high profile gigs. And one of the things that was interesting was that he said to us is that a G7 is a G7 is a G7. So it's the notes are the same. You're playing funk, you're playing blues, you're playing rock, you're playing jazz, but it's like the ornamentations that are different with it. And what I found too is that you can really, if somebody wants to be a quote unquote, hard rock metal guy or shred guy, you can still take concepts because all the 12 notes in the chromatic scale are the same. You can still take concepts from jazz guys or even practice approaches from jazz guys and apply them to your style of music, and it's all universal.
100%. And I don't know if you found this, but for me, when I was like 16 to 24, I was only about metal and shred. But and one of my first teachers, his name was Fred Leduc. I went to see him between the end of my final year of high school and this 8 weeks before starting university. And I was like, Fred, I just got accepted into a jazz degree. Like, you need to help me out here. What do I do? And I studied with him over summer to get my jazz chops up. And he goes, Michael, probably around about age 25 is you're going to start listening to jazz and things like metal. Just probably, you'll still like them. You'll still listen to them every now and then, but you'll be totally into jazz and you'll just totally mellow out and switch. And I was like, I'm never not going to listen to metal. And then sure enough, age 25, jazz stopped saying like elevator music. And I was like, oh, hey, what was that? Like, I reckon I've listened to this song hundreds of times and now it's really starting to appreciate. So just as a side note, I think as players, we will mature. We'll get bored of the same old things we can do or that we've mastered or that we finally get the hang of. And then we go and seek more and more complex things. And that will sometimes take us into that jazz world or that fusion world or, even more extreme progressive stuff. So yeah, that's just my little side note. Sorry to interject in there. Yeah, my jazz teacher told me that around about age 25, Michael, you'll stop listening to heavy metal as much. You'll still love it, but something will change and all of a sudden you'll start loving jazz. And I was like, no way, that's never ever going to happen. And then sure enough, like dead on 25, it just started to sound better. And I sort of segued through guys like Frank Gambale and Scott Henderson and some things like that. But all of a sudden, the songs which I thought were elevator music just magically sounded like, the best, most exotic sounds in the world. And, here we are all this time later, just loving it. So I think a lot of players and even teachers will mature out of that, one genre kind of mindset and then just start appreciating music, a lot more generally.
Yeah. And, there's very few players who are just total one trick ponies where if you don't look somewhere in their past, they've actually studied many different styles of music. So one of the things I uncovered was an interview from Zakk Wylde talking about how he studied out of the great Ted Green books, which, you listen to Zakk Wylde and you listen to Ted Green, like you would never think that, they don't even sound like it's the same instrument, but there's a lot that you can learn from different places and all apply it to your favorite style of music.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, it's so funny when you start like hearing or researching into some of your favorite players and realizing how diverse and broad their own influences are, to the point where, Zakk Wylde and Ted Green, you go, yeah, no way in hell do those two things connect, but they obviously do. And, the results are amazing.
Yeah. And one mistake that people make, though, is that they think that they have to become virtuosos in all styles, but just like dipping your toes into like as many different genres as possible is super helpful. One thing I do recommend for all students is, most important thing I learned in LA was getting pretty good at funk guitar and R&B guitar from the late great Ross Bolton, who taught at MI. He was Al Jarreau's guitar player forever. And before I moved out there, I thought, the most important thing would be learning, some hip altered sounds, or just kind of the different ways to play over chord changes. But by far, the most important thing that I learned was actually keep a good beat and not keep a good sense of time, which doesn't necessarily mean, being able to do, metronome exercises at 180 beats per minute. It means, having like these like simple chord changes and simple grooves and being able to make them come alive. And Ross, you can still get his books and you can still find videos of him on YouTube, but I'd really suggest to everyone, like, yeah, you're not going to be Mr. Jazz and Mr. Country and everything, but if you're going to do just one thing, the most important thing is funk and R&B, and really having that solid foundation and rhythm and ability to not just keep time, but to make the time feel good. And there's so many guitar players, to see live locally, they either missing the groove thing. And when I get people from other studios, I'm like, yeah, it's just, like the groove and the time just isn't happening. Even though they can play metronomically fairly well, there's just like a different level of making stuff really come alive. So that's my big suggestion for that.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. So you actually studied with Ross?
Oh yeah, and by you saying that, you've heard good things about him. And the way you said
it's funny you mentioned his book, because obviously when I was at university, I was probably in my second or third year, and I had an arm operation in the second year. So I withdrew in the second year, had the operation in the third year, and was back to playing in the fourth year. So my degree sort of took me 5 years instead of 2. But I was really, really struggling going from like a metal player, repeat it parrot fashion, learn the piece for the exam. I didn't have any groove, didn't have any feel, didn't understand the instrument well enough, was playing catch up rather than being able to, learn how to speak. I could imitate like a parrot, but I couldn't speak on my instrument. And I was really struggling, and I've just gone, man, well, I've got to get my chops up. And I went on like YouTube and typed in funk guitar strumming, because I think we were doing funk for a term or a semester or something. And this Ross Bolton tutorial came up, and I was like, oh man, this guy's like knows his stuff and he's really, really helpful. So I sort of like watched that whatever 90-minute video or whatever it was, kind of like with a splatter paint in the background, that art one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I ordered the book off like Amazon or Book Depository or something, and got it like a week later, and just like worked my way through that entire book. And to this day, it is the most helpful guitar book that I've ever had. And I think like I did a YouTube video saying my top 5 recommendations. That was my number one recommendation in terms of the book that helped me the most, and the book that for my advancing students who want to go into more session work or be in bands playing, for them to get their funk chops up and their chord changes and understand how to sit on the grooves. It's definitely my biggest recommendation for those who've gone beyond, okay, I can do bar chords. What do I do now? It's like, okay, go learn this funk stuff because it's applicable to so many things. And if you can play funk, you can play metal, you can play jazz. It just gets your timing down pat.
Well, it gets the timing down, and it's just the groove and the feel is super important. And even if it's for people that are just want to be singer-songwriting type players, acoustic players, and I don't want to say just only, because there's nothing wrong with just wanting to stop there. You add that, and it's just like it's like the guitars on like the easiest video game cheat codes ever. It's the simplest thing. Because you want to just play by the campfire. Like, all right, you could do James Brown songs and make them feel good. It's just, like playing Beatles or whatever is making that feel good. It's just it's just a huge world of difference. But what I also found too is that really it helps people tap into like the human side of playing, where it's not you understand the dynamics, you understand how to make guitar parts come alive. And that was another big thing that I learned out in LA, was just not to have everything just in like a total flatline with my playing, and just learning like a little bit about that funk and R&B and like the ability to groove. It's just like, for me, that's like the first step of getting people to really start to tell compelling stories and like learn how to make their own music come alive.
That's really important. You mentioned, that's the flat line there. How do you bring your music to life? So definitely really, really important lessons. And oh man, I'm just so jealous right now that, you've got to learn with Ross. And it's a real shame, because when I was like putting together a list of people for this podcast, I was like, I would love to be able to go back in time and speak to him. And unfortunately, he's since passed. And that was, I reckon, within about 6 months of me first discovering him as well. So it was like, I found like the coolest guy in the world. And I was just, getting a bit of a fanboy happening. And I was like doing all the research on him and going, oh man, like if I'm in LA next year, maybe I can call in. And then, unfortunately, too late.
On YouTube, there are someone did take like a video camera over to his house, maybe his basement / studio. So there is like maybe like a half hours or 40 minutes worth of like private lessons from his basement. Probably would have been a couple of years before he died. But another tribute to Ross is just like, I was not remotely good at that style back then, and now I'm at the point where if I dedicated a little bit of time to it, I could really be awesome at it. But I'm like good enough that I can do any gig that I need to do at this point in my in my life. But I was pretty bad with it back then. And what I remember from Ross was just like he just had this patience and kindness towards everybody, and it wasn't just like, okay, I'm just going to put this time in for the people who are going to be the next guitar playing superstars. He put a ridiculous amount of time, extra time, into helping me, and I was bad. We had 10-week quarters, and I think we had like 2 or 3 quarters with Ross. For maybe like half the time I was terrible with it. But I remember, there's one time where it clicked, and it was like pretty good. And it was like, oh my God, this is actually working. And, Ross was elated, and it just like, it just like made his day that, here was this guy who objectively sucked at the funk and R&B style. That all of a sudden, it clicks for me, and it's like, wow, that's it really made his day, and that kind of excitement for him. It's something that's important to have as a teacher, because you really the guitar is what you're teaching people, but it's just you really want to touch them on a deeper level. And one last point too about the funk and R&B stuff is that I'd played in a like jazz / I guess we'd call it like a funk band before I went to LA, and one of the songs was Chameleon by Herbie Hancock. And, I was like, oh, I can play this. This is easy. And I did it in the band, and it was easy. And, I'll never forget, like the first time I'm playing in front of Ross, it was just awful. Like, fell on my face in, every possible way that I could have fallen on my face. And I said to him, oh no, he said, I turned around, and looked at him, and he was like, "Oh, you've never played this kind of music before, have you?" And I didn't want to be like, "Oh yeah, no, I've played it before and I thought it was easy." And I was just like, "No," but he did it in a kind of like reassuring way, like, "Okay, we'll get there." But there's a difference between just kind of like being able to get by with it and faking your way through it. But funk and R&B is just so important that it's worth your time to really dig in and play it authentically.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, I think we as teachers, we've got to have that role of, the nurturer, and see some people are going to be super simple to teach from the beginning, and other people are going to, be like a seed that needs to be watered and watered and watered and watered, but eventually it'll bloom. And as long as we give it, attention, whether that's us to ourselves and going, yeah, I've got to keep on watering my funk playing or watering my jazz playing. I need to keep on, investing time into nurturing it. It'll get there. And the same thing is true of our students, and great teachers realize that.
I agree.
Now, Ross is the author of one of my favorite books, but you yourself have transitioned from, being a guitar teacher into being an author, and you've got 3 books out at the moment, and I believe a couple more coming down the pipeline. So your first book is called The Beginner Guitar Emergency Survival System. So what do you think most beginner guitarists get wrong, and what sort of led to you coming up with this special method for them, a special book for them? And, it sounds like situation's pretty dire with some people, and, this is the rescue operation. So tell us all about this book.
Well, I came up with the title because years ago, Fender did a study that showed 90% of people who start playing guitar quit within a year. And I said, man, that's pretty bad. And then I thought, like, how bad, you extrapolate those numbers out, it must be just abysmal for people to kind of keep up with it. And, as the reason I wrote it was because it's just like, as most teachers, it's just like the majority of people you get won't even be like intermediate players. It's, people with like no experience, or people who just like various levels of beginning guitar experience. And what I found, like, the more that I taught them, was one is that in the book I have a metaphor that's called the dead end guitar habits, where it's like people are in a maze. They think that they're doing the right things, but like but people do naturally by instinct actually harms their guitar playing in the long run. So, for example, one of the biggest mistakes that I saw immediately as I started teaching beginners was that people, they'd look at the C chord and they'd put their fingers down sequentially, not simultaneously, because, okay, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And, it's natural to do that. But what happens is that gets caught in people's muscle memory. And it's, but then, before they know it, they can't play any chord without putting their fingers down sequentially. And I even, once had a guy who played for like 10 years, and he had like a decent strumming ability. He was, pretty good with that, but he couldn't, switch between chords in time because he had to put his fingers down sequentially at that. So that's one example, but there's quite a few examples of what I like that, of just, like the physical challenges that people have in the beginning, and just like helping them kind of just like overcome just like the obstacles so they can even get to the point where it's, they get past the beginning level, no matter what level that they want to get to. Another thing that I found with that book is that people have a tendency to try to learn too many things. So I once had this retired guy, he tried finger picking, he tried blues riffs, tried, different scales, tried different chords, tried, there's like 20 plus like different, I think there's a country that was like somewhere in there. And, he tried like 20 different categories of stuff on his own and through classes and other lessons, and he couldn't do any of them well. And what I quickly discovered is that I wanted to have, people want to be able to play music. I want to help them be able to play music as quickly as possible. And I want to give them like the foundations so that they can actually really do the things that they want to do on the guitar. So I only focus on 3 things, which is rhythm and strumming. Go back to the funk thing because it's super important. Chords and chord progressions, and then just like putting everything together into simple arrangements of songs, so that from like day one stuff is sounding like songs. What I'm vehemently against, especially for beginners, is just doing chord coordination exercises and just this dull stuff to get people up to a certain level where they're ready to make music. 'Cause I don't think there's, from my experiences, there needs to be any separation between starting to play guitar and making music. It's just like that can happen day one. So that's my approach is all rooted in music for beginners. And that's what the book is about.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so much of what you said just resonates with me. Everything from going 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. And I always say to my students, it's like how you practice is how you play. So if you practice putting the fingers on sequentially, like you said, when you go to play, you'll put the fingers on sequentially. So yeah, definitely notice that with students, and the fact that again, they often get so excited and, oh man, to have a time machine and go back to being 15 again and discovering music and guitar for the first time, it's absolutely amazing. And I think that's a truly wondrous experience that we have to sometimes tap back into and put ourselves back in the shoes of our students, but also communicate that discipline to say, hey, if you try and do 10 things at once, you're going to be really average at those things, or you'll have too many things that you'll, again, if you've only got 10 buckets of water and you've got 20 things to water in the garden, then you're going to have to let some of those things drop off. And students fall into the trap of, learning things to keep it exciting and fresh without ever following through. And that causes all the other things to, drop off or not be worked on enough to consolidate into long-term memory. And yet someone who knows everything about guitar but can't perform anything or play anything.
And that's honestly, it's the biggest problem with like YouTube and tablature. It's just, you have this easy access stuff and nothing really gets learned and mastered the way that it should be. So for people more advanced in that, it's just like, this collection of, half-baked riffs. It's just like, but they can't play songs. That's because, because you're just going from riff to riff and, song piece to song piece. That's a different story.
That is. And it's, again, it's never been a better time in history to learn guitar, because there is so many resources available to you. YouTube is an absolute goldmine, but unfortunately as a beginner, you don't know what's good, what's bad, what is great, but it is the wrong time to learn. And you just end up like a dog chasing its tail, going off in a million different directions. And then just all of a sudden, you can't do anything good, and you start questioning whether guitar's for you, because maybe it's just a bit too tricky. There's too many things I've got to learn. Yeah.
And then it's something you also have to balance the entire time, because it's you're well aware of the mental side, but it's a battle for people. Just always thinking that they have to learn more and more to truly master it. And it's not really the case. It's the opposite.
Yeah. I always explain to my students is, hey, if you're going to the gym, you would get an exercise program from a personal trainer, and it would be the same 3 exercises. Maybe there's 3 exercises a day, 3-day cycle per week, and you do that for 12 weeks. And all you do is those same 9 exercises week in, week out, and you get better at them, and your muscles get bigger, and you lose weight and you get in shape, and then you've got something to show. Whereas if you went in the gym and you did something different every day, every day of the week, for 12 weeks straight, you do a whole bunch of exercises to an okay level, but you'd be totally overwhelmed and you wouldn't get the result you're looking for. And when I explain it to students that way, they go, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. But unfortunately, as humans, we're wired to seek new, interesting things. So we're finding our psychology, but the students who can understand, or the teachers that can communicate that to their students and say, hey, there's a lot of exciting things, but if you can have a bit of discipline just to stick with these fundamentals, then that's going to get you to where you need to go much sooner.
Yeah, I agree.
We could talk about these beginner things for so long. Just one final question before we move on to your next book. So what could teachers do better, in your opinion, to help their beginning guitar students navigate, all the hurdles of being a modern guitar player, self-teaching, or navigating YouTube and everything in between?
That's a good one. I mean, I think I've kind of alluded to it, where I found like the physical stuff is really challenging for people, and they're not, if there's, again, putting the fingers on sequentially, they don't know how to fret chords, and so that all the notes like sound out clearly. The stuff's getting muted all the time. So I'd pay attention to the physical struggles, and I would also really just try to connect things to music and make it as exciting for people as quickly as possible. You could do it with, like what I do, where people from day one, I do Let It Be in the key of G, because you could do 3 of the 4 chords with one fingers, with the one finger open chord, and you have to do the D chord, unfortunately. But then I give people real strumming patterns with the whole notes and half notes and quarter notes with it, and then and I build from there. But it actually, from day one, they can sit down with real arrangements. I want to give people that that connection to music as quickly as I can, and I do that for little kids too, where they'll learn Star Wars, melodies and stuff like that too. But people have a natural tendency to want to delay the making of music, or feel like, okay, where what people do is they put kind of hurdles in place, and they look for teachers to kind of put hurdles in place for them as well, where it's like, okay, once I can do these like 3, 5, 10 different steps, and I'll be ready to make music. And it's not the case. What you want to, or you don't want to be in the position where people are waiting for like a pat in the back for you to actually be ready to make music. You want to be in the position where as quickly as possible, like they feel that confidence, and they feel that there's a connection between the stuff that I'm getting and actually playing music. And if there isn't a connection between the stuff that they're, so again, like the coordination stuff, I'll see chromatic stuff for beginners from like the first week, and it's just like, it's just stuff that's just not applicable to anything that they'll want to ever do in the foreseeable future, or perhaps ever as a guitar player. So I really just try to keep that as laser focused as possible.
Awesome stuff. And I really like that you mentioned, simplifying those chords and getting them playing straight away. And ultimately, the only limitations our students have are the ones that we generally put on them. And sometimes they'll put on their own little limitations. But, I'm sure we've all been amazed by that one kid who can play Eruption who's only 12 years old, or someone who, just that you spark that, love of guitar inside them, and they come back after having practiced 2 or 3 hours a day and just blow you away with how smooth their changes are. So, yeah, very important lesson to take away from what you just said in terms of don't put limitations on your students, especially creativity. And that's something that resonates with me, and I almost overcorrect for, because coming from the learn it to play at the exam kind of background, I only ever learned pieces off a piece of paper and then played it back. I never learned how to improvise, never learned how to solo or anything like that. And then when I went to a university doing a jazz course where improvisation is the name of the game, it was a very rude awakening for me. So, and I just was told, once you master this, and this, then you can start improvising. When now we get 5-year-olds being creative and coming up with their own melodies simply by giving them 8 numbers, 0, 2, 3, 5, 7, 8, 10, 12 on a single string. Hey, why don't you jumble them around and see what you can come up with over a backing track? And that's something that everyone of all ages loves doing as either the warm up or, cool down of their lesson, is just having a bit of an improvisation and seeing what comes up.
Yeah, and that's actually the natural way of being. And we have to coach ourselves to get back into it, but also, the 5-year-old, it's the easiest thing in the world for 5-year-olds to do it. What's get harder is getting older people, especially adults, like back into that state of mind where they can actually do it and be as open and free about it as possible.
100%. And I'm sure we've all seen that meme about, everyone's naturally creative, and then you learn how to be less and less creative as you conform to the rules of school and things like that. And obviously a topic for another day. We could go really deep onto that. But I do want to move on to your next book, 10X Guitar. And sort of, reading the synopsis, full disclaimer, haven't gotten around to reading this one yet. It's a bit hard to get over here in Australia, but I will get around to it. But overcoming frustrations in your playing, and also helping develop that freedom of being able to do whatever you want on the instrument. So any thoughts or your reflections on what leads to most guitar players getting stuck on the instrument?
It's a big question. What I've found is that the way that guitar education has evolved is that it's not really, for more advanced people, it's not really like based so much in vocabulary. It's more based in mechanics, like just like the theoretical stuff. And when you as a more advanced player, so we were talking briefly before this, and I want to mention the 3 I's to you, because it's what I think is something that naturally leads to people being creative, but it's this old, long lost system that's just completely gone by the wayside, especially as modern technology has come about. But what it is, it's I think I don't even know exactly how it started, but I first heard about it from Tara Cocconi, who I mentioned earlier, and he said it was the original jazz guys did it, and they just kind of like passed it down from generation to generation. And what the three I's stands for is imitation, integration, and innovation. And what I think that those three steps represent is a sort of just like a complete methodology for learning and advancing as a guitar player, because everything is based off of the actual musical vocabulary. So I'll go into like a little bit of detail about it and then kind of get back to your original question. The first step is imitation, where back in the day there was, I mean, there's some sheet music, but you couldn't buy, like Charlie Parker. There was no omnibooks until the 70s, which is omnibook is Jamie Aebersold transcribed all the Charlie Parker solos and published them. But what people had to do was it's like learn by listening to the music deeply, learn by playing, just like picking off like one or two notes at a time from records. And it was this really slow process. But what had to happen was they had to imitate what was on the record, listen deeply to the recording. They had to identify the notes, different dynamics, all the like the shapes of the lines and everything, get it off the recording. And sometimes they write it down, and sometimes they would just get it to the point where they played along with it. But the imitation steps, what it really does is that it takes what people did naturally to learn their initial their native language. And since music is a language also, it's just like now you're just taking what people did naturally to learn language, and then you're making it, you're also doing it as a guitar player. So most people don't even listen to records these days until they really listen to the records. But then if they do, it's just like they're not getting it to the point where they're imitating it well. What Tarek said is that when you're imitating it, you want it to get to the point where what you're playing is indistinguishable from the recording. So somebody could walk by and think that whatever, Van Halen, Steve Vai, or even Charlie Christian, if we're going way back, is like actually in the practice room, like working out their lines. And then you want to take it one step further and get it to the point where what you're doing is somebody could walk by, you're playing it to a metronome and it just sounds just as close to identical to the recording as possible. And the more that you do this, the more, and really this is like what I found the most important thing for my development to a real guitar player is doing stuff like this. But what, the music gets ingrained in you, imprinted in you, for lack of a better word. And it's just kind of like automatically in your brain. And then once you start to learn in your fingers, and it's just like, okay, it's there. And then it's just, you're getting all this vocabulary under your fingers through imitation. Next step would be integration. And this is to go back to what we were saying, where once you start working with real musical vocabulary like this, instead of saying like, okay, today we're going to do, the caged, this inversion of the caged for thirds. Next week we'll do it in fourths. Next week we'll do it in fifths. You actually find like real musical examples if that's what you want. If you decided that was something that you wanted to do, and then you'd integrate the ideas off the recording into your own playing and your own improvisation. So like a kid kind of just like working out vocabulary in their mind, you'd be working out the vocabulary on your own, just jamming and playing, or over a backing track, or whatever. But you'd be taking the stuff that you've actually imitated, you do all the nuances off the record, and then you're integrating it into your own playing. And then the third and final step is innovation, which would be, how do you take that and really create your own vocabulary and your own music and your own kind of voice with it? And you maybe combine two different ideas, maybe you change some of the intervals, maybe you ascend instead of descend. But is sort of the process that people went through naturally, decades and decades ago. And these were the people that, with no apps and no, couldn't just like look up a YouTube video to learn how to play their favorite songs, and was what people did. And it's how they be, and all that working directly with stuff off recordings and wrestling with it and getting it under their fingers, and then saying, like, okay, what can I do with this to make it better? That's kind of like that whole, and I talk more. There's a whole chapter about the 3 I's and 10X Guitar, but you definitely have the idea from here. But what I really like to do with people is to, like, it's a lot easier to be creative with a blues scale if we're playing Freddie King and Albert King lines and they're creating their own lines off of it versus me saying, okay, here's a blues scale and let's play connect the dots and, for you to come up with riffs. Or if I show them licks that are based off of it, that are real blues licks, but then that doesn't necessarily go far enough because it's not necessarily based in the recordings that people actually know and can relate to. So I always try to relate stuff to recordings and to vocabulary to help people springboard their creativity.
Fantastic. And I hope everyone listening at home is writing down those. Can you say those 3 I's for us one more time?
Yeah, it's imitation, integration, and innovation. And there's a local in the Denver area, there's a local jazz radio station, and they had I don't even remember who it was, some old jazz guy actually talking about that in an interview on the jazz station. He called the second I assimilation. So if that's easier for you, that works as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I really appreciate you sharing that topic with us because it's something where, if it's only known by a few people and it's led to some great results, if we can get that out to more and more people and increase the quality of education for the next generation so that more of those 90% of people, if we can lower that 90% of people number to 85 and then 80 and 70, then we're going to have a whole bunch more guitar players and way more guitar music. And again, that's why we do what we do here at Top Music, is because we're trying to improve the quality of teaching and the quality of life for our teachers as well. And by being able to understand that as teachers ourselves, to get ourselves to somewhere where we're happier with our playing as well as that of our students is really, really important. So, Eric, I do appreciate you sharing the 3 I's with us.
Yeah, no problem. As soon as I heard it many years ago, I was just like hallelujah, where's this been? And then it's gotten similar results for people that I've shared it with over the years. And it needs to be, it's, again, known in the jazz world. If you were Mr. Bebop, I would think you would have come across it at some time, but it needs to get out to because again, all the stuff is universal regardless of your favorite style of music.
Yeah, awesome. Well, your third book is called 101 Ways to Improve Your Guitar Playing, and if you could narrow it down to 3 tips for guitar teachers which they could use to better help their students, what would they be?
So I know we're getting short in time, but one of them is a quote from Dizzy Gillespie. I think it was Dizzy Gillespie talking about Charlie Christian and John Collins, who were 2 of the earliest guys took the guitar from the rhythm section to actually making it a solo instrument. And what Dizzy said is that he liked John Collins playing more than Charlie Christian because he had multiple different ways to play different things on the guitar. So he would say that, okay, all of the Charlie Christian's lines were always in one area, but John Collins could play something in another area or multiple areas with the nature of the guitar neck. So I like teaching people, especially once they get to the point where they're figuring out vocabulary and stuff by ear, is not to only get locked into playing things in one area, but to take that mentality and find how many different places they can play one thing. And for me, that's what really unlocks the fretboard. There's another awesome concept from Tara Cacconi that Michael Thompson came up with. Michael Thompson is a great session player, called the 6 T's. And it's not all I learned was like 3 I's and 6 T's in LA, but it's good for abbreviation. It's good to stick stuff in mind. And one of the 6 T's are all of them in my book. And if you don't want to get the book, you can still Google it and figure out what Tarek and Michael were talking about. But what these guys, way they think about playing technique is in the service of like actually executing parts that need to be played on songs as opposed to technique for technique's sake. So that's something that I've become really big on, is not just being able to do whatever chromatic exercise or whatever, string skipping exercise at a certain BPM, is like actually do stuff for the sake of the song. And the third one is to kind of go back to what we said or what we were saying about creativity. And this one, I don't think we have enough time to really get into it, but have you ever heard of John Holt, Michael?
Yes.
Okay. He's one of my heroes, and he's like probably the reason, him and John Gatto, if you know him also, the reason why.
I don't know John Gatto, unfortunately, but John Holt, yes.
It was the reason why I'm not left teaching when I did was discovering their work. And one of the things that John Holt talked about is, and I talk about this on 101 Ways, is that little kids at that 5-year-old age, when they play, they make mental models of the world. So their mental ability only kind of like, or their mental understanding only accounts for about like 10% of what's going on in the world. And if you observe kids playing, it's just, there's a lot of thinking that they're going through to make sense of the world. But as people get older, we, especially as adults, we wait until we have all the pieces in place. So we would never be comfortable improvising or making music if we only quote unquote knew, like 10%. We wouldn't be okay. Let me just kind of just like figure out the rest of it on my own. It's just like people would just wait for that extra, like 90% of the information to come in. So my encouragement for teachers and the people that their students is to get people, regardless of what it is that they're learning, to get them playing and creating as soon as possible, to get them out of that habit of waiting for 100% of whatever it is that they're supposed to know before they can make music.
Eric, that's some really, really solid advice and wisdom there. And I really appreciate the fact that you've come onto the podcast today to share everything. And I feel like we're just getting started. I wish we could talk for another 2 or 3 hours, and I'm sure we definitely could, but we are out of time for today. So on behalf of the Top Music Guitar community, I definitely want to thank you for coming on the podcast today. Really looking forward to you coming back and telling us about all the other amazing stuff you're doing. And I know you've got a few more things in the pipeline, so we can definitely get you back to talk about those. But listeners, you can find out more about Eric at www.ericstoneguitar.com, as well as 10xguitar.com. And of course, if you look up those 3 books that he has, the Beginner Guitar Survival Kit, Emergency Survival System, 101 Ways to Transform Your Guitar Playing, and of course, 10x Guitar. Great reads. Check them out online on Amazon. And Eric, once again, thanks for coming to the podcast.
Thanks. And sorry about my cell phone going off, but thank you. And I'll talk to you soon, Michael.
No worries. Guys, thanks for listening in. We'll see you on the next exciting episode of the Top Music Guitar podcast. Until next time, stay safe. Have a good one.
If you enjoy this show and want to hear more of our work, be sure to subscribe to this podcast. For links and resources mentioned in this episode, including a free ebook on how to find more guitar students, visit us at www.topmusic.co/guitar or check out the show notes. And lastly, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.